Coming up on this week's episode of TechSNAP, the UK Prime Minister wants a social media kill switch, and we'll go over the SSD upgrades that eBay just did to all of their servers, and you won't believe the cost. And then after that, we take a peek at Microsoft's data center in a box. All that and more on this week's episode of TechSNAP. Hi everyone, and welcome back to TechSNAP. My name is Chris, and this is our 18th episode, which was shot live on August 11th for release on August 12th, 2011. My name is Chris, and joining me on the Skype line, like every single episode of TechSNAP, is Alan. Hey there, Alan.
Hey, Chris.
Hey, welcome back, man.
Hey.
And we have got a week of news that I couldn't even believe. If you had sat me down 15 minutes before the show and said, this is what we're talking about this week, I would have said, Alan, it's too much show. It's too much has happened this week.
It is quite a bit. Well, especially with DEFCON just being over.
Yep.
There was lots of stuff coming out of there. We only covered a couple of things because there was so much. I might have more. A friend of mine went to DEFCON, so I'm going to see
get a first-hand report, huh?
Yeah.
Very cool.
See if there was anything that he found particularly interesting.
Well, now, because this episode is so news-heavy, we thought we'd sort of make next episode sort of dedicated to the viewers. So we want to do another Q&A episode. And there's a couple of ways you can do that. First of all, there's always the email address, techsnap@jupiterbroadcasting.com. And even better, there's the show comments page. So if you have something specific to a particular episode, you can leave it on the comments page of that in the show notes there. Or another great way is our rather rockin' Reddit page. If you go to links.techsnap.tv, we've got a subreddit there, and you can submit stories into the show, vote, leave comments, and things like that. And those all get worked into every single episode as well. So send in your questions, your IT questions, things like that. Take advantage of our free consulting offer here, and send them in, and we'll try to answer the best ones we can in next week's episode of TechSNAP. So what do you think, Alan? Should we jump right into the news?
I think we better.
Yeah, I think so. All right, so this first story is a little bit 1984 for my taste, and it comes out of the UK. And you know what I love, Alan, is that maybe it's because you're a Canadian or something, but you don't have the U.S.-centric focus that a lot of our shows tend to have. So this is good to get something that's happening outside the U.S. This is coming from the U.K., and it sounds like they're threatening to create some sort of social media kill switch, right?
Yeah, well, depends
sort
on
of
where you read the news article, how sensational the headline is. But
okay.
So in London, they've been having problems with some riots.
Yeah, no kidding.
Big protests and a lot of looting and so on. So the Prime Minister was proposing that the police, the intelligence services, and the telecom industry investigate if it would be technically feasible and if it would be right, the right thing to do, to disable access to social networks during times of civil unrest. Specifically, he's noticed that people noticed that with all these attacks and the looting that were happening, a lot of it was being organized via social media.
Isn't that just like saying you're using whatever popular communication medium of the... I mean, that's like saying that they used wanted pages back in the day or poster boards in the post office. I mean, it's just whatever the form of efficient communication
close all the post offices because people were posting messages on the board in the post office organizing riots.
Well, okay, you know what I'm saying, though. I mean, it's just whatever a communal way to interact.
Well, and, the obvious thing is if they were to manage to do that, people would just use text messages or whatever. Right, and that's how they organized the revolution in Egypt, was text messages.
And some of the stories we saw come out of the London riots involved RIM helping police locate people they're using the BlackBerry Messenger to, I would assume, organize riot stuff. So we've seen them using those kind of technologies too. And
a number of people were arrested for posting messages on Facebook that were for the point of inciting violence or civil disorder.
Mm. Yeah, well, I mean, if you're dumb enough to post something in public that you're going to commit a crime, I mean, it doesn't matter where you post it.
Or, specifically trying to egg other people on into committing crimes as well.
I mean, really, if you're going to post it on Facebook, you might as well also just put a sign out in the front lawn of the police department saying, hey, this guy over here. I mean, it's about as public as you can get. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, so. And it's usually tied to your real identity, unlike something like Twitter that might be slightly more ambiguous.
So is there logic here that if they could clamp down on one more form of communication that they could sort of throw water on the protest fire? Is that the idea?
I don't think so. That's their idea, but I don't think it would actually work.
No, it just seems impractical.
Even if they managed through the telecoms to disable PC and like internet and mobile access to Facebook and Twitter, people would just use something else that the government hasn't heard of yet.
Well, and as long as you have these mobile devices with data capabilities, the possibilities are endless. They literally have to shut down like the cell towers.
Yeah, and some people were actually proposing that, but it's like, well, if you completely disable the cell towers, then what about people that need to call the police to report the looting and the rioting and so on, or people that need an ambulance or whatever?
Or what about the fact that law enforcement could just utilize social networking like they already have with the Facebook stuff and hone in on stuff? I mean, let people post this stuff publicly. It's like they're giving you a trail to where the crime's happening at.
Exactly.
It almost seems like they'd be embracing it because there's nothing private about this information, and these Twitter and Facebook have both shown to be more than willing to work with law enforcement to hand over user information.
And specifically, I think that was one of the angles that it wasn't clear from the quote from the Prime Minister, but one of the things they were possibly looking at was a way for the government to legally block certain people from using Facebook.
Oh, like you lost your social networking credits?
You would lose the ability to do that if you were inciting violence through Facebook or whatever.
You heard it here first, everybody. Buy your TechSNAP social networking license.
Well, because
that way.
By the sounds of it, what's happened with some of the people is they've arrested them and then released them on bail with the condition of their bail being they can't use a computer.
I see. Sort of. Okay, that's not too
kind
uncommon.
of impossible and harsh now.
It is, yeah. I mean, back like when they did to Kevin Mitnick back in the day.
Exactly.
That was a little more doable.
The day after he was released from prison, it was ruled unconstitutional to do that now.
Wow.
Because, like, really, how could you live in today and not use a computer at all? Like, technically, is a cell phone not a computer?
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
A little smartphone.
Is your car not a computer now?
Right.
You know, most of them have something fairly sophisticated in the dash now.
Do you any other thoughts on this story? Or should we jump over to the next one?
I think
I noticed you also have a link in the show notes where the BBC has like a bunch of more information following the story.
Yes,
too, so
the BBC has a bit more detail and a bit less sensationalized version of the story than the original link.
There you go. So if people want to read about that,
yep,
that'd probably be a good follow-up. All right, next story.
Yeah, if specifically if you live in the UK and you're worried about this, you might want to read up on it.
And it seems to be whenever stuff like this happens somewhere, it happens everywhere else eventually.
Yep.
It's kind of that kind of stuff.
Exactly.
Now this next story, Hong Kong's trading market got hit by hackers, and this completely missed my radar, Alan. So I don't know any of the details of the story. What happened here?
So specifically, denial of service attack was launched against an online bulletin board that they use for posting announcements.
Oh, really?
Specifically, it's announcements about stocks. So in this case, it was an announcement from HSBC, which is one of the world's largest banks, about the fact that they're selling off their U.S. credit card arm.
Oh.
And obviously, that news announcement was going to affect the price of their stock, either up or down.
Right.
But the attackers disabled the bulletin board so people wouldn't be able to read the announcement. And so because of that, the exchange suspended trading on all the stocks that had announcements coming out that day that wouldn't be able to be posted.
So by sort of attacking the source of where the news would be coming from, they're able to manipulate the market by
they might have been able
information.
to. They might have been able to.
Right.
So the market suspended trading for those issues.
Right.
Freezing their stock price. But yeah, so specifically, if you knew that the announcement was going to cause the price to go up, if you attacked the site so nobody else could get the news for a little while, then you could buy a bunch of stocks at the lower price, and then when they shoot up, sell them off again.
Now, we've talked about, probably in a few episodes of TechSNAP, the whole theme regarding news sites getting taken over by attackers and controlling the messaging, and that sort of being a roundabout way to do an attack. Now, here's a great example of just by attacking the news source, not even having to go after the super secure, theoretically that financial institution should be locked down, right? And so it would be a lot of resources and a lot of time to go after and attack them.
Yep.
But attacking a message board where the information comes from, heck, that's not so bad. I think I could pull that off, and all I have to do is just stop that for a little while. I can manipulate the market.
I'm not sure why this was such a big deal. Like, don't those go out as press releases on the newswire, and they would get out in every other factor? Like,
I think so.
Reuters would post a copy of the story, and
eventually it would seem
it
like
would go out on the old-fashioned
I would think
newspapers.
if a company had their official channel, the way they message, and they post it there, even if you could delay it for 2 hours before the other outlets picked it up.
30 minutes even, yeah.
Yeah, right? Even 30 minutes.
Enough to buy their stock and watch it shoot up and
Yeah,
sell
you just need enough time to execute the trade that you need to place, and then there you go. It's like, it's all about timing. So even if it's a small delay, I suppose. Probably something that's not too uncommon. Probably a lot more of this goes on than we actually are even aware of.
There's a little detail at the bottom of the story about that. So the stock issues that were affected were HSBC, which is a giant bank, Cathay Pacific, which is, I forget what they do, but they're big, China Power International, they run power plants.
Yeah.
And the actual Hang Seng Index itself, the stock exchange itself, its own issue was suspended.
Wow.
So obviously being attacked would probably drive the price down.
Huh. Alan mentioned that Alan, Project Morris says that one of those companies you mentioned was an airline company too.
Yes, that's it.
Pretty significant, I guess, in the sense of the low barrier of entry to cause such a disruption.
Yeah.
In terms of what it takes to actually cause that kind of thing. It's like,
it basically kept it offline for the whole day. And so the index said that if the attack wasn't resolved and, the announcements couldn't go out the next day, that they would get the announcements out some other way and trading would resume so that the price of those issues wasn't frozen for an exceptionally long time.
Yeah. I guess the chat rooms, I haven't seen the story yet, but I guess the chat room's saying a story's coming out today about Sony getting hacked again too, which is just unbelievable. It's just, these poor guys just never get a break. They really stepped on the bee's nest on this one.
They did. And then the last thing was that earlier this year, the NASDAQ exchange revealed that cyber attackers had breached their security and managed to plant malicious code in their Director's Desk web application.
Now, how about that?
I'm not sure the details what that web application does, but it kind of sounds like it's, internal management tool or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But either way, they managed to break in and implant malicious code. So they didn't break in and steal data or change something. They went in with a specific advanced persistent threat.
Yep, right? Get in and get your code in there and then just wait back and
leave it there and be able to control things for... So basically the question is, I wonder how long that code was there before NASDAQ found it.
Right.
And how long NASDAQ knew about it before they told anybody else.
It's funny. We've had a series of stories come out lately about people discovering persistent hacks that have happened months and months ago. It's becoming pretty clear that a lot of these companies are not taking the precautions necessary to find this stuff when it happens. All of this stuff is getting found way after the fact. I mean, the original Sony hack was way after the fact. There's these stories coming out over the last couple of weeks about the U.S. government and 50 companies having a 5-year persistent attack. You have this story here about a persistent attack.
Well, specifically for this thing, if they're modifying code or whatever, it's not that hard to have a tripwire type system.
Exactly.
I built one using Bacula before.
Yep.
That basically, look for modified files on the system.
Heck, I've used Tripwire before. Modified. And Tripwire is great. And there's free versions and commercial versions.
Exactly. Now, Tripwire can be a little ungainly if you have like hundreds of machines.
And you make a lot of changes.
That's where something like Bacula comes in.
Yeah.
Where you can exclude certain files. It's like, that's data, so it's supposed to change.
Right.
But these specific binaries should never change. And if they do, I should get told about it.
Mm-hmm.
And specifically with something like Bacula, because it's centralized and you're connecting out to the machines, it's a
removed third party.
Right.
Tripwire runs on the machine, which is unless you buy the really expensive platform version.
Right. So if I break into the machine, I could just disable Tripwire and you won't get the email.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And then you might not notice.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas with Bacula, it would be a little different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we've done an episode where we talked a little bit about Bacula. I don't remember which one it was, but if you dig through the TechSNAP archive, there's one in there where I think we even diagrammed a little bit of how Bacula works, if I'm recalling correctly. I love Bacula, so we could always talk about it again if there's enough requests. What do you say we jump over to eBay? You ready to talk about eBay?
Yes.
All right, so
this one's interesting.
This is interesting, especially for a couple of server guys. eBay is transitioning their server infrastructure over to two big new not new anymore, but two big technology changes. Virtualization and SSD. Now, Alan, do you have the details on some of this? Because I got to figure the SSD part must be a very expensive transition.
Well, even worse than you would think.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So approximately half of eBay's 4,000 virtual machines now run on SSD-backed storage instead of
100 terabytes worth
regular.
of SSD storage.
Yep. It's interesting because their 4,000 virtual machines run across approximately 200 physical machines, which is a much higher density than I was expecting, but those machines are probably really big.
Yeah, and
You know,
and they're probably
you get
pretty
like
specialized virtual
8
machines.
processors with lots of cores and like 150 gigs, 56 gigs of RAM on each one or whatever. But
It says here in the store they have 12 separate arrays of SSDs. I mean, geez Louise.
Yep.
What are they trying to do? Just improve throughput?
yeah, they said by making this change, they save rack space, about 50% reduction in rack space, because the SSDs take up less RAM. A 78% drop in power consumption, because it's not just the hard drives, but the physical enclosures
Right.
take less power, and a 5-fold boost in the I/O performance.
Okay. I mean, that's
And
significant.
the average time to deploy a virtual machine, which is basically just cloning one of their existing template images, dropped from 45 minutes to 5 minutes.
Wow. So that's a pretty huge pretty huge savings if you're trying to roll out new machines to handle load or something.
Right. So specifically, they were doing before they had NetApp NAS appliances, which were 15,000 RPM drives via fiber channel.
Mm-hmm. These
sounds
things are
like they might
crazy
have
too
been,
because they're like little 3.5-inch laptop-sized drives that you end up putting in a server, but they're so small because in order to make them spin that fast and get the data access that fast, they actually have to make them that dense. It becomes a matter of actually the size of the platter. So they're really expensive drives, and they hook up using a technology called SAS. I mean, the whole chain is extremely expensive.
Yep. So now the thing they were replacing is not the newest generation, right? So it's not the newer faster 6 gigabit per second SAS and so on. But
And I got to interrupt for a second because Project Morris in the chat room says he wants to know if we could buy their old equipment on eBay. But I'm bummed. Sorry. Okay, continue.
that's awesome.
I know.
But they said that in the end, one rack full of the SSD storage is equivalent in performance to about 8 or 9 racks full of the previous drives.
Whoa. Okay, one rack is equivalent to 8 or 9 of the previous
Yep.
in terms of speed.
Yep.
Wow. So that's a,
Well,
that's
'cause
a
the
ton of floor
SSDs are a
space
lot
savings
faster.
too.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because if you want performance, and you have to hook all these drives together to get. Like I've seen experiments done before where, 2 RAID controllers with like 5 drives each trying to match the performance of a single SSD.
Yeah. I did it. I switched to SSDs in my machines, even though it's less space. It's just clearly, for me, the not having to worry about the hassle of setting up RAID in all of my editing stations is nice.
Yep.
And then B, in terms of a laptop, you really don't have much of a choice. So you just have to go as big as an SSD as you can get in a laptop and rock it. And you know what? Having switched from like a RAID 0 3-drive setup to a SSD single drive, the performance is really, there's some aspects maybe to the SSD that are slightly slower when dealing with one large file read and write. But the reality is when you're editing, you're actually reading all over the file. You're not just streaming the file constantly. So it actually ends up being pretty good on SSD.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So do you have any ideas of the cost for this?
Specifically, yes. One thing is that they're not using regular hard drive form factor SSDs.
Okay.
So they're not buying like 2.5 or 3.5-inch hard drive SSDs.
Oh, okay.
These are specially built modules.
Yeah.
So it's like a 2U enclosure that's just full of solid state memory.
That's cool.
So it's basically like a giant 2U single drive that are available in 2.5 terabyte, 5 terabyte, and 10 terabyte modules.
Can I have that,
Huge.
please?
And they are connected via 6 gigabit per second SAS interfaces.
It says here in the article the maker of these drives is called Nimbus.
Yep.
Nimbus Storage Solutions. Yeah, and they have a big eBay spotlight on their front page.
Yeah. The scary part is that it costs $10,000 per terabyte, per usable terabyte, because they actually have more space than that because the SSDs wear out and you swap out bits of it.
Huh. Now, I just recently heard, too, that SSDs might not be as reliable as everybody thought, too.
Yep.
That they have a finite life, and that while they're not going to stop spinning, they might run into other issues.
And when they do fail, they tend to fail more spectacularly.
So why not now? Is it still cheaper, you think, than going with, like, RAM drives? Because it seems like at the cost, at this price level, you could just have banks and banks of RAM that you just load from spinning storage when they power up.
Right, but then you could never keep up with the writes necessarily, right?
I guess if you the RAM could be treated as a drive, and you would read and write to that, and then there'd be some sort of back-end process that would save that cache to a physical
But how would
medium.
they do it consistently, right? Like if it's a database, you have to save all those gigabytes of it at the same time. Otherwise, parts of it will be different in different states than the other parts. and the hard drives could never keep up with the writing.
Right.
Because it'd be sequential, they could do better than the random performance, but you would need to
You'd
be
have
able
to
to
have
do snapshots of the RAM drive.
Mm-hmm.
So you'd have to run the RAM drive with ZFS.
And you'd have to have like additional RAM drive storage to store that as it gets written to the hard drive.
Right, because it'd be copy on
right. You'd
write
have to,
and so on.
Yeah.
You'd need
So,
at least 2 or 3 times the amount of RAM of how much you need to be able to
Although
store.
you talk about the prices for this stuff, like you know, you can't even
$10,000 per terabyte.
You can't even get a price quote on their website. The only way to get price from these guys is if you contact them directly. They won't even give you price on the website.
Well, because most people when they see $10,000 per terabyte will run away.
Yeah, like, what the crap?
That's just for the modules, not for like the controllers and the software and all the other stuff.
Right. I mean, geez
So,
Louise.
you know, eBay's spending a lot of money here, but it's working for them.
I guess, but you know, the other problem is all that just lives in one spot. Unless you buy that same setup for your multiple data centers, it seems really expensive. But
and I don't know if this system if they're using RAID in it at some point or how they're.
It must be. I guess if this is just I didn't realize eBay was still rocking it this hard. I mean, I kind of thought eBay was going the way of the '90s websites. I didn't even think of it. It required this kind of.
I guess they still have lots of traffic.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, I'm sure that these SSDs will prove. I got to figure. You're never going to recover the cost, I wouldn't think. Even saving that kind of data center floor space, which is extremely expensive, saving that kind of data center power, and the heat, I don't know, man. It would still take years to pay off.
Physically, if you're saving, like those, the fiber channel SANs are not cheap either.
No. In fact, I was just going to say, I'd worked for a company that bought probably a 6 or 7 terabyte storage array. And it had a mix of 10,000 RPM drives and 15,000 RPM drives, and it was all fiber attached. That was probably $60,000. It was really expensive.
So again, about the $10,000 per terabyte, and you get a lot more performance out of the same of SSDs.
Mm-hmm. So it's not so crazy when you look at it in those kind of.
We might see this end up lowering the price of traditional non-SSD storage.
I hope so.
Yeah.
You know, Steve Wozniak works for a company who's taking SSD storage and just putting it right onto a PCI Express 16X card, and then you put that card into a server.
I've seen a bunch of those. Yep.
Yeah, and they're just probably fast as RAM, really.
Yeah, it's basically an SSD without the limits of the regular SATA or SAS interface.
Right. So that's got to be crazy fast.
Well, I think the performance is about the same as over the 6 gigabit per second because the flash is only doing 300, 400 megabytes per second, right?
Right, but you can
if you're rating them together.
Yeah, right. Yeah, totally. Which of course, right? I mean, geez.
Yep.
Man.
Because you don't need a lot of the features that SAS and SATA provide, like native command queuing and reordering the commands to make them make sense when you're accessing a platter because there's no platter.
Right.
And there's no penalty for seeking.
Right. That's the beauty of it. Should we jump on to this story regarding the security flaws in the Fed radios, or do you want to touch on anything else on eBay?
We can talk forever about the storage stuff.
Totally. All right, well, this story comes out from the Wall Street Journal, and it says here the headline is Security Flaw in Fed's Radios Make for Easy Eavesdropping. I guess there's been some sort of fundamental flaw in the encryption that they use, right? Is that the gist of it?
A couple of fundamental flaws in the encryption they use, yes.
Oh.
And some training and problems and documentation problems.
Surprise.
Specifically, I think that one article there shows a picture of the radio in encrypted mode and then another picture in not encrypted mode. And you see the only difference is that little symbol at the top middle of the screen.
Yeah, just like a little, almost like a circle with a line through it.
Yes, that circle with a line through it, that means encrypted.
And then not encrypted is just the same exact thing without it.
There's no symbol. Now, if you were looking at that, you might assume the one with the X through it means
don't
not
use
encrypted.
It. Yeah.
It means it's not encrypted, but it actually means it is encrypted, and I guess that's supposed to mean nobody can listen in or something.
I guess. The circle is closed.
Yeah.
We're in the cone of silence.
During the study where the University of Pennsylvania was eavesdropping on encrypted radios, they once heard somebody explaining to somebody how to turn the encryption on, and they were actually telling them how to turn it off.
Oh, no.
Right?
Oh, users. I love that It doesn't matter where a user's from. A user is still an end user.
So specifically, the encryption system on the radios is sometimes sending messages and in the clear, even when the users think they're actually communicating securely.
Amazing.
So that's a flaw with the user interface there and the training. But the the vulnerabilities in the way it does encryption result in trivial passive attacks where people are able to listen in on what's being transmitted over the radios, which can include, names of informants and all kinds of sensitive data. But they're also subject to active attacks, where an attacker with very modest resources would be able to jam a specific type of communication between the radios. In the article, they talk about this really cheap little toy device that allows, it's designed for little girls to do IMing and text message.
Are you serious?
Yeah, it's this little pink device. And using a couple of those, slightly modified, you could jam the FBI secure radios.
Well, it looks like you could even with a little bit of money, you could get some hobbyist gear and you could actually use something to listen in.
Yes.
I found a picture of this pink
device there. That can be used to jam the Fed's radios.
The little I am me pink device.
Yes.
That really is a little toy meant for girls. That's funny.
Yes.
I thought you were just kind of rubbing it in, but no, that's exactly what it is.
Yeah, exactly. And it's with this active attack, an attacker could block the law enforcement officers from being able to send or receive encrypted messages.
Yeah.
So if you're going in there and your radio's jammed all of a sudden, you don't know it, you're not receiving some critical message telling you don't go in there, it's a trap, or
and
whatever.
What a perfect little tool to use during an attack.
Exactly.
That's
some of the other problems are that the symmetric encryption system that it uses has a couple of different modes. Some of those including DES and 3DES, which we've obviously known for quite a long time are not very secure anymore, although it does support AES.
Oh.
But the problem is that because of the ways the radios are built, they're meant to be very error tolerant. So if part of the message comes through slightly scrambled, it doesn't throw it out. It plays it anyway because, a little bit of static or whatever in the radio message is better than not getting the whole message.
Right.
Or not knowing there was a message. Because the radios, it's not IP-based, so there's no, retransmission, right? You don't send the message again if the person didn't get it.
Yeah.
But because of that, the transmission can be slightly garbled. You can't use regular advanced encryption mechanisms like CBC, cipher block chaining, because that relies on the message not being corrupted in any way.
Right. You have to get 100% of the message in order to be able to correctly.
Right, because each block is encrypted a second time with the block before it.
Yeah.
So that if your plain text has the same message in it twice, they come out different because of the order.
Mm-hmm.
So because of that, they can't do that. And also, they can't use message authentication codes. Basically, a MAC is it's like a hash or a signature on the message to prove that it hasn't been modified or tampered with.
Okay.
Because the message can be garbled, the MAC would reject the message saying that it was modified. So they can't use that either. So because of that, an attacker, it's open to a bunch of different attacks, like a replay attack. So an attacker with regular radio equipment could record an encrypted message, maybe not know what it was,
and then play
play it back later.
Totally.
So if that instruction, if that was some, like the commander of the group of federal agents giving everybody an order, like, meet up over here, then you just, wait 20 minutes and play that back and confuse the hell out of everybody.
Yeah, that's fundamental to the design of the system.
Yep. Also, you could...
That's crap.
Because without the MAC and there's no identity verification, right? Anybody who has the encryption code is considered to be part of the network. You could impersonate a legitimate user and start talking on their encrypted circuit. Or their plaintext circuit if they don't realize they're not using the encrypted version.
Right.
Or you could inject text messages into their system.
They've got to switch to a new system.
Basically.
It's as simple as that.
Fundamentally flawed.
Yep.
And the versions of these radios sold to some other countries use only RC4 40-bit encryption.
Oh my gosh.
Laughable. Especially considering that RC4 is the algorithm used in WEP, which was implemented with a flaw, that's the wireless thing that's like
easy to crack. It's the O'Douls of encryption. It's like
basically they implemented the RC4 algorithm incorrectly in such a way that it was possible to, by listening for a couple of minutes, predict what the next key is going to be.
I only sigh because they should have known better. I mean, even aside from the technology, it's obvious.
Yes, it's like, let's use AES, but oh, we can't use this feature, this feature, this feature, or this feature of AES because we want this fault tolerance
Right.
or this error recovery. So there's a link in the story to the PDF file from the University of Pennsylvania. It's not all that overly technical, and just by reading through it, you'll just be amazed at the stuff they found.
Really?
It's like I was only able to skim the first couple pages, and this is all the stuff I found, all the problems with it, all the things you do with it.
Wow.
There's more in there.
And that's just the first couple of pages.
Yeah.
That's frightening.
And it's like 30 pages.
I always like how you manage to get a story in here that just scares the ass out of me every episode, and I think that's this one.
Yeah.
This one I
just
just
scary place.
the ones where the story's like, yep, they made an implementation decision that was bad, and now the system has to be replaced. That's always like one of those things where you're like, oh man, that's going to take an act of Congress to make that happen, and that never happens.
Yeah, and that's going to take how much money to replace every encrypted radio? Like, as far as I know, they've been using these same radios for like 20 years, right?
Right.
And they just keep buying more of them.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's like once they have a standard, then they're set.
Yeah, and they would almost have to replace all of them at once to ensure that, if two different groups of law enforcement had to work together, they would have the same radios.
You got to have
compatible radios.
Yep, you got to have that. You got to have that.
And so they would basically, it's the IPv4 to IPv6 problem. To make it work, you'd almost have to switch everybody at once.
Or at least roll out new equipment that can do both.
Yeah.
Which is expensive.
Yeah, and then you'd have to be able to. The main reason why we haven't moved, why even IPv6 is going to be backwards compatible with 4 in some way, is that there are some devices that will never be replaced, right?
Yeah, like Project Morris in the chat room says somebody's so getting fired for this.
Probably
if
not.
They're still working. Yeah, they're probably not even working anymore.
This is a military-industrial complex, right?
Yep. Nobody's going to be held accountable for that.
Exactly.
Hey, do you want to talk about the next story, something on DEFCON, or is there anything else you want to cover on this one?
No, I think we better get going.
We teased a little bit that there's be some news from DEFCON. This is one of the first stories, and it seems like every year DEFCON comes along. Now, everybody probably knows now DEFCON's like a big hacker convention that takes place down in Las Vegas, and the smart people just know you don't even bring an electronic device with you. Just show up with a pen and paper. Don't bring even a smartphone. And every year, I swear, cellular networks come out taking a beating. Last year it was GSM. This year it looks like CDMA took a beating. And
4G GSM as well.
Yeah, yeah. So what are the details on this, Alan? What's going on?
No, this one hasn't been completely confirmed.
Okay.
But the reports indicate that somebody mounted a successful man-in-the-middle attack against devices in and around the venue for DEF CON. So if you were like within range of this guy's attacking device.
This is why Chris says don't bring your smartphone to DEF CON.
Yes.
Or your iPad or your Galaxy Tab. Just don't bring it.
Attackers were able to gain permanent kernel-level root access on some Android and PC devices by installing rootkits on them.
So now they're reading your text, getting your address book.
4G.
Just by walking by.
Yep. Specifically, it seems that they were able to inject specially crafted packets into the data stream of the 4G or CDMA and, alter what was showing up on the internet browser or whatever. And through some of that, we're able to install a rootkit. The details are still very sketchy, but I'm sure more about this will come out if...
Well, man, I mean, this is how it came out last year for the GSM stuff. At first, it was a little sketchy, just kind of some reports here and there, and then it came out to like, no, this is happening, and there's even some equipment you can go off and buy off the shelf to do it.
Yep.
And, with these smartphones, they are little computers with an always-on internet connection. Do you remember when we first started having PCs with DSL and broadband connections and just the wave of issues and Trojans and viruses and malware that XP started having?
Yep.
It just slammed us. And now we're walking around with something like that attached to the internet all the time. With some of the most sensitive data we could have.
If you go back to like Windows 98 when installing updates had to be done manually, right? There was no auto update.
Well, in a lot of cases back then, you would initiate a dial-up connection, and then when you would turn off that dial-up connection, your computer was completely isolated from the rest of the world.
Yep.
And you didn't have to worry about really anything. So now that freaks me out to know that I walk around with something that's just as complicated, if not more complicated.
You remember back like Windows 2000 with the code Red Worm. It's like back then, service packs for Windows came out on CDs and you had to order them.
Right.
And that's why there were so many servers that were susceptible, is that it wasn't part of the process for Windows to always be, getting the patches and the hot fixes and the service packs.
I think the real disaster will be when a smartphone when malware on a smartphone, and because of the nature of it, it's likely going to be an Android phone, I would think. I don't know. I just am really afraid of the day when it can propagate directly from phone to phone over the cellular network. Because if that happens, if something like that can happen where, where you used to have like Blaster and things like that, where you could be on DSL and if you didn't have a firewall and you get infected, well, if that starts happening on cell phones and malware starts spreading like that, we are so screwed.
Yep.
So we got to get this stuff locked down. We got to watch this stuff. And this kind of stuff...
Especially as more and more people start using their phones for like monetary transactions, like with the near field communicate to...
Yep, and, and things like
Square. The phone
Square.
companies really want you to store value on your phone and use it to pay for things.
Also,
just,
by the way...
remember the old viruses for dial-up computers that would use your dial-up in like 4 o'clock in the morning and call some foreign country and run up your phone bill?
Yes.
Well, you can see that for your cell phone too, right?
Yeah, oh yeah. Also, I don't know if you noticed, at the bottom of the article, they posted an update saying that a third party has also, a second source has also contacted Extreme Tech and confirmed this report that they're able to do these CDMA and 4G breaches. So they've got second party confirmation on this story.
Yep. So it definitely looks like there's more to it there than we're able to get so far.
Now, should we jump over to the Microsoft story?
Sure.
Now,
if you remember back a little bit, we got a little tour of Google's data center,
which was way cool.
Yep. Microsoft is giving us a tour of theirs now.
And Microsoft, not to be discounted in this field, Microsoft spends a ton of R&D on actually researching efficient data centers.
It's amazing when you look at it. They actually offer like 217 services on the internet.
Yeah, they're getting big into it.
MSN Messenger and like Hotmail and Bing and stuff like that. But there's all these other ones you don't think of too.
So this video they're showing here, I guess it's just kind of like a, hey, this is what our equipment and our setup looks like.
Well, it actually goes a little bit further than that. It shows their different generations of their system, right? They start out with servers and racks, and then you up with these modular pods of like containers, containerized server setups, where they just unload them off the truck, hook up water for cooling, electricity, and so on, and they're all completely self-contained.
Yep, Microsoft is really big on this modular truck computing, and they actually have a warehouse that they build them in and ship them out of, like you would like any goods you're shipping on a semi truck hauling a trailer. It looks like it's a big semi truck trailer, and they build them in this facility, and then they drive them to the city where they have their data center, and they drop it down, and they plug it in, and they hook up the hookups, and it goes.
Exactly, and they said it lets them deploy and expand a lot faster and put basically spot capacity. If all of a sudden there's more demand for Bing in the Northwest, then
you drive a truck there.
Exactly. And they also save a lot of packaging by doing it all centrally, right? They get everything in bulk and then build a bunch of these containers, and it's just a lot less wasted packaging.
If you're watching the video version, they're showing the containers right now, and they just got clean
inside
versions.
with the lights off. That is so geeky.
Yeah.
See that? It's just all these blinking lights.
Yeah, I did see. It looked like the Matrix.
Yeah.
I don't know. I guess so. I've already talked about this before, but I've been reading this book called Inside the Plex, and this Inside the Plex book talks about how hot Google was on knowing that Microsoft would be hot on their tail if they knew how Google was building out their data centers, because Google felt like they had cracked this code for really efficient data centers, and they went all the way to the extremes of setting up like shell companies and buying data centers under fake company names. And in fact, in one circumstance, they even paid off a town not to tell people who was buying there once the town folk figured it out. I'm not kidding you. This is all in this book, Inside the Plex, and it's legit and it's real. It's from interviews from Google employees. And they knew that Microsoft would become a fierce competitor in search as soon as they figured it out. And Google figured that if they could keep the secret of their data centers, then Microsoft wouldn't have a crucial bit of information to sort of base their initiative off of, like how much investment is needed to do this kind of thing. And what that forced Microsoft to do was come up with their own way to scale in a unique way. So Google has built their system, and because they kept it so secret, Microsoft was forced to go build their own system. And this server in a container system is so popular that right before Sun Microsystems was acquired by Oracle, Sun also began working very heavily in this space.
Yeah, they had a fancy one with their UltraSpark or whatever.
Yep. And I believe Microsoft was some of the first people to this.
Because I know Google has been using the container idea as well.
Yeah, it makes so much sense.
Yeah, I think the scary thing for Google is that they realize that their algorithm is not as complicated and secret as people think. A lot of everything Google does is based on pure brute force. right? Like Google Translate. The reason why it seems to work better than a lot of other ones is it's pure brute force rather than trying to actually understand the language.
Right, and part of the dynamics have changed. When Google first started, the only way to get data into a massive search database was to index it yourself.
Yep.
When Microsoft has started up with Bing, and now Google's trying to make these changes, social networks almost act as like these signal feeders into the search engine that feed it with links, and it's a curated list. If you see 100,000 people linking to something, you have a pretty safe bet that should probably show up a little higher in the search rankings. Whereas in the past,
Exactly.
that would have had to be completely mined from God knows what by spidering the web.
Yeah,
Now they just have
specifically
signals from Twitter.
Yeah, to let Google know about every new blog post that comes out.
Yeah.
This is people tend to tweet about them, and there's these blog ping networks, right, where you send out a signal saying, I just posted a new blog article. And Google hooks up to those and gets that kind of live content a lot quicker than they used to.
If people are interested in this Microsoft data center story, go check out the show notes. There's a video in here.
It's quite long, actually. It's
a lot of information. It's a 10-minute video, and they're giving out a lot of details.
Now, specifically, the thing I noticed here is Microsoft seems to be using standard servers.
Mm-hmm. That's very
whereas
big, yeah.
Google and Facebook
Right.
have custom hardware.
Being a Washington State resident, growing up in the Washington State area, where the IT in Washington is very heavily Microsoft focused.
Yep.
And the Microsoft doctrine has always been like this grand Microsoft thing. Is all of these disparate third-party solutions coming together with Microsoft sitting on top of it. And they're big on when you start working with Microsoft, and like if you go into the Microsoft offices, it's nothing but branded equipment, HP and Dell, only branded gear throughout Microsoft servers everywhere. It is a huge component of them, and it's one of the biggest differentials you do see from the newer guys are these custom servers.
Yeah. Well, because Microsoft kind of started out as a big company by the time they were building data centers.
Yeah.
And so they had the budget to be able to buy all this fancy server hardware. Google started, and they were building off commodity hardware because they needed a lot of hardware cheap.
If you
and so they had to come up with this other way of doing it.
I would bet if you are an IT person starting in Washington, I bet there's a really good chance that it would seem very, very, I don't want to say non-standard. It would seem very inappropriate to use anything but an HP or Dell or IBM server. Like a server sitting on a shelf with a motherboard, a power supply, and a hard drive. I just could never see that happening ever. It just seems extremely inappropriate when you come from that Microsoft paradigm. Now, coming from like the web
because at that point, Microsoft is like, we don't want to build hardware. We want to make that somebody else's problem.
Well, and that sort of philosophy also came when it was a more one-to-one direct relationship where it was Windows and a server, Windows and a server. Now with virtualization, the hardware is abstracted. The hardware doesn't matter so much anymore. And coming at it now from a new angle where you go from virtualization from the beginning, your hardware, you can be totally agnostic. You don't really care at all. It's a totally different approach when it was back a one-to-one ratio back in the early days of Windows Server. So that's another sort of old school angle that Microsoft takes. And it's interesting that you picked it up in this video because I see it too. I definitely see it. And it looks clean. It looks good. And I'm sure it runs great. Yep. But it's not like anything you'd see Twitter, Facebook, or Google do these days. And you can't deny that they have built incredible infrastructures on their own. So it would seem they've proved that method.
Like Facebook probably started with that and then found it for efficiency and cost effectiveness to switch to the custom hardware.
Google as well. Google started like that.
Google started with just commodity hardware and then customized to something kind of maybe in between.
Right, yeah.
High-end hardware, but not off the shelf.
Right. Yep. Pretty great video actually from Microsoft. I'm impressed that they're this open since some companies would consider this to be vital competitive information. So it's a good little video to see how the real big dogs do it if you live in a smaller IT world or if you've never seen a real big data center implementation. This is a good video to see. You can just see how serious of a business it really is. And that's what it is. It is running a big data center is a business.
Serious business.
And they have it locked down.
Yep.
There you have it. All right, Alan. Well, you know what? It's time for the roundup.
So our first story in the roundup is Syrian hackers have defaced Anonymous's social network. Anonymous started a social network when they got kicked off Google+.
Google+, yeah.
And apparently some Syrians were disappointed that Anonymous hacked the Syrian government's websites. And so they hacked Anonymous's website.
Well, there you go. Anonymous also in the news because they say that on November 5th, they're going to take down Facebook. But then like another group of anonymous posted and said, don't do that, just go outside. So anonymous is a little...
well, that's the thing with anonymous is that there's nobody in command. And so a couple of people who claim they're a part of anonymous, but is there really a membership?
Right.
Isn't everybody a part of anonymous?
I guess
and nobody's a part of anonymous?
I don't know how that works exactly.
Exactly. And so some people are proposing that everybody should work together and take down Facebook on November 5th.
Yeah, I
now,
guess...
obviously, they don't seem to have a concrete plan and the resources to do this, and that's why they're projecting such a far-out date, is they're trying to get up enough hype and enough people to do this all at once.
Okay, so it's not like they found some sort of amazing vulnerability. They're just sitting...
No, they're just going to, sit there and try their low-orbit ion cannon or whatever.
Gotcha. Oh, that's adorable, isn't it? They're just
and, how many of them got arrested? Was it the other week? Like 16 or so of them for the same thing against PayPal? So.
You can't arrest an idea, man. Can't rest an idea. Can't rest it. All right, so this next one here is yours, Alan, on the roundup, and it is 8 ways to circumvent the Protect IP Act.
Yes, so we talked about the Protect IP Act, which was about the forcing ISPs to censor their DNS servers and so on.
Yeah.
And so this...
And also, by the way, it didn't require court intervention to do so, just the request of a commercial company.
Yeah. Interesting one I saw the other day. There was a story about the iPhone 5. The cheap Chinese knockoff.
Oh, yeah.
And there was a video showing the device, and when I tried to play it, it's like this was taken down by a copyright claim by Apple.
What? For the video of a device? Just of a gadget?
Yeah, exactly. It's like, how does that work? And I think that exactly is that it's the site got a DMCA notice and took it down without even reading the notice.
Yeah.
Or looking at the video or anything like that.
It's essentially the way they're able to hit us in the face with the DMCA, they're not going to be able to hit us in the face with copyright.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Whatever. All right, so the next story comes out of DEFCON, another DEFCON story. Lockpickers open those, like the key code cards on government locks in just seconds. This
this one is ones that require you to swipe a card and type in a PIN number.
Yeah.
And in seconds, people were able to just walk through the door.
A guy named Tobias and his partner Toby. How about that for an adorable couple? They plan to demonstrate a series of these simple hardware hacks to show just how easy it is. And I guess they give the demo at DEF CON.
Yep. Well, I swear the people that make these locks and stuff are, I don't know. It's like they don't understand security. It's like you're a company that makes two-factor authentication locks. You think you could do it right?
Just give some thought. Just give a little bit of thought to it. Just think about it. Yeah.
Or hire somebody that has. But like there were similar ones. Mythbusters did one about biometric locks, especially when you do fingerprint scans.
Mm-hmm.
Well, most of the fancy doorknobs with fingerprint scans, even really expensive ones, they were able to defeat with a photocopy of a fingerprint. Little piece of paper and just
that's stupid.
let you in. Or one fancy one that said it could tell if the finger was still attached to a person or not or something.
Yeah, temperature sensor.
Yeah. Or no, it wasn't temperature. It was conductivity.
Oh.
Anyway, so they took a little piece of paper, licked it, and then it unlocked the door.
Yuck. This next story in the roundup is yours, I think, right?
Yep. This one is...
the most expensive 1 byte mistake ever.
Yes. Paul Honeycamp, which is he's a big BSD developer. He wrote this article about how the C programming languages stores things in memory.
Yeah.
How it does the an address and then the magic marker, so null terminated strings, as opposed to storing the fixed size of the string in memory, and how many problems that has caused over the last 40 years.
Oh, that's probably a pretty fascinating read.
It is, and it's actually not that long.
There you go. Another really great read that you threw in the roundup that I'll give a mention to here is you threw an article in here on tips for just working remotely successfully, like how to successfully pull that off.
Yeah, so a lot of people are interested or already are working from home over the internet.
Yes.
Like me, for example.
And me. Most of the time. So that's a great little article. I'll have to read that one. I'll let you take this next one on the roundup, the domain seizures.
Yeah, the U.S. court claims that domain seizures do not violate your First Amendment rights to free speech. So basically they're saying that we can seize your domain names and that's not impeding on your free speech because you could just put up a different website or something.
See, that seems weak to me because one of the reasons porn is not shut down is because porn was ruled to be considered a form of free speech. Yep. So why, if I'm putting porn up on the web, is that free speech? But then when you're taking down my free speech, that's not an infringement on my free speech.
Basically, the argument the guy that had the site was making is that while they took down his site because he was hosting torrents or whatever, his site also had a forum, and by taking that down, it was impeding free speech. And the court's argument was, well, you have a different domain name where you can still access that, so it's not impeding the free speech. But it's like, well, either you're going to take away my other domains because it also has the torrents, or you're just admitting that this entire thing was a waste of time.
Yep.
Because the site's still up.
Yeah. Either
so
way,
they're basically using their own argument against themselves.
Exactly.
It doesn't make any sense.
It's completely illogical. All right, so the next story on the roundup, as a contractor, I just have to shake my head. This contractor loses hundreds of bank account details, leaving them at a pub. In fact, it says here that it was just on an unencrypted memory stick, and there could have been as many as 20,000 different tenant records on there.
Yes, so it was two separate incidents, actually. One was a contractor who had 800 bank accounts on a USB stick, and another one was a landlord who had thousands of his tenants' personal details on a USB stick.
Can I just give them the dumb arse of the week clap? I mean, you might as well, like the article points out, and this is just a great way to think about it. If you're carrying around an unencrypted USB stick, you might as well be carrying around a stack of the same thing printed out. It's just like carrying around the files and leaving them on the bar.
Same thing happened actually at the college where I used to work. In the student services office, they have one for peer tutors. They get paid like $9 an hour to tutor people. All their records are stored on a USB stick that was plugged into a computer in this office. Well, apparently at some point, that USB stick went missing.
Sure, somebody just...
whether somebody leaned over the desk and just yoinked it, or if somebody... I don't know if they ever determined if somebody actually stole it or if it just got lost.
Oh, come on.
But it had all the bank account details for all the peers tutors because they got paid by direct deposit. It's like, why wasn't that encrypted? And why was it on a portable USB stick?
That way it's backed up. You know how many users tell me they work off of USB thumbsticks? That way they have a backup copy? It's like, okay, first of all, a USB thumbstick is not a working backup copy if you are working off of it. You know what I mean? Like a backup is a backup copy. It's not the one you're working off of.
It's an archive, not an active copy.
And second of all, that just makes me nervous as heck because we've all heard the stories about those USB flash drives having write limits and just dying out. And then eventually all it takes is somebody going wonk and just pulling it right out of the back of the USB port.
Yeah, well, most computers have them on the front now. And so they're not that durable. They're not reliable. They're easy to misplace.
Yeah.
Have you seen, like, they have like this big now?
Yeah, oh, they're tiny, yeah, totally. All right, should we jump on to the last story in the roundup for this week? This one I heard about earlier in this week, so I'm glad you threw it in here. The U.S. internet providers have been hijacking user search queries and then redirecting them. And I guess this is happening like at the DNS level, or at least it was.
Or stateful packet inspection and looking. So if you Google for certain things, they hijack your traffic and send you somewhere else. Apparently, it might be using some kind of device. So some company's going around selling ISPs. Here, plug in this device into your network, and it'll hijack your users' traffic for certain search terms, and we'll pay you.
It says here in the article that all of the U.S. ISPs that were caught doing this have now halted the practice.
Because if you remember, I think it was last week we talked about Google warning people that their searches are being hijacked.
It says here too that now they're continuing to intercept them, but they're then just passing them on to Bing and Yahoo, and they're not doing anything for Google.
Yep.
I don't like this. The ISPs just need to be a dumb data pipe. Just leave me alone.
It's like the power company trying to say, oh, we're going to turn off that receptacle over there because you're using it for Bitcoin mining and we don't like that or something.
Right, yeah. I don't like it, Alan. I don't like it. Nope. All right, that's the end of the roundup.
Like a utility, nothing else.
That's the end of the roundup. Should we get into the Bitcoin Blaster?
Yep.
All right, so last week I had a lot of bad news in the Bitcoin Blaster. It was a negative week. And it kind of seemed like the Bitcoin news has slowed down over the last couple of weeks, too. Like, there hasn't been the rapid blasting of the news. But one of the things you mentioned was just the crazy volumes we've been seeing of trading just all of a sudden again. Like, the Bitcoin market has been bouncing all around after seeing a lot of stability for quite a while.
Yeah, it got quite low, down to almost $6, and then it bounced back up to 10, but it started to slide a little bit again.
It did start to slide again. Now, were you tempted to pick some up when it was down low?
Not so much. I was mostly like, hurry up and go back up so I can sell some more of my Bitcoins.
Oh, so you're sticking to the mining approach.
I'm still doing a little bit of trading, but yeah, I made most of my money during the the big crash when I bought at like, what was it, like $14 and sold them at 26.
So you know me. You know what happened to me last week.
Yes.
I announced that I was one of the people that got suckered into the My Bitcoin situation.
Even though I told you not to do that.
I even said in episode 9, I said, don't use My Bitcoin. I said it.
Yep.
I even said it.
I know.
So not all was lost, though. Fortunately, the My Bitcoin guys, here's what they claim happened. They claim they got horribly hacked, and the Bitcoins that they did have active, which was like 51% of all the Bitcoins that their users have, they kept in an active wallet on their My Bitcoin server. And then for DR purposes, they kept 49% offsite. And they said, we made some sort of judgment call determining that that would mean we wouldn't be able to answer or run on the bank if that were to happen from our users. But if we ever got hacked, we'd have, just under half of our storage available, or our Bitcoins. And so they said, we're going to come up with a remediation process. You can fill out this form. We'll figure out how much we owe you. And then, we're not going to let you continue to use the service. We're just going to do an immediate transfer out of here. And
So you might get half your Bitcoins back?
Well, so the thing that was interesting is when they first came out, they clearly said the 49%. You'll get 49% of your Bitcoins back. Within a couple of hours, they revised their website to take out the 49% and just said some of your Bitcoins back. I don't know if it's still 49%. What I do know is the second I saw that, I jumped on that bad mamma jamma, and I already got it. I already got 49% of my lost Bitcoins back. So that's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
it's
it
better
cuts
than
your
nothing.
losses in half.
Yep, cut the losses in half, which is honestly when you'd come to the realization that you just lost like $1,000 worth of Bitcoins, not losing half that is much better than losing all of it. So I was a happy boy. I fired off that transfer immediately, and then I just fired up my Bitcoin client and just watched the confirmations tick in. I was like,
Yep.
yeah.
I think that might have actually been looking at the date on that. And if you go back to the graph you had, it looks like that might have been part of the reason for that dip in the price.
Yeah.
Was that all of a sudden people had all these Bitcoins back, and they were trying to.
And I think
a lot of people wanted to turn those back into cash after being, having this bejesus scared out of them like you did. They're like, yeah, I've decided I want to get out.
I agree. And actually, I'm happy it's at $9.08 like it is now, because when the My Bitcoin announcement came out, the people started getting pretty suspicious like Thursday and then and over the weekend. But, Dwolla transactions are locked up. Then Monday and Tuesday hit, and the news came out about My Bitcoin. And that's when the Bitcoin market dropped down to like $6 in those few days. And then
I think it was just a surplus of Bitcoin starting to be sold.
That's what I was worried about, but it's the fact that it's $9 is actually doing pretty good. I mean, it
was over 10 earlier today, but now it's back down.
It's fighting, but that's good. That's good.
Well, it's kind of supply and demand, and it's gonna bounce around quite a bit.
There you go. So link in the show notes if you want to read the news from the My Bitcoin guys and all that kind of stuff. One other thing in the Blaster segment, just kind of a fun call out, a nice mention is. Bitcoin has hit 7 million Bitcoins in total circulation now.
Yep.
So the Bitcoin has reached that important milestone. Now, what is it, Alan? 21 million total coins will ever be mined, regardless of what's lost. So if you lose, like what happened with the My Bitcoin stuff there, or if I don't know, it wasn't my.
Well, those ones weren't lost, but
yeah, there's that exchange that lost their wallet. That lost
If you just there was what was that other service, and they accidentally erased the VM with the only copy of their wallet on it.
Yeah, with like 21,000 Bitcoins in there or something.
Yeah, so those are gone forever. They can never be gotten back unless someone decides to try to brute force the private keys for that, which would be an interesting experiment. But anyway. So that basically means that will always be less than 21 million Bitcoins. And so that kind of fixes what their value could be.
But that's a good thing in some ways, because
basically it puts a hard floor on how little they could be worth.
Mm-hmm. So
and the fact that they would basically always go up in value unless Bitcoin was entirely abandoned as a currency.
One of the common threads you'll see online regarding Bitcoin still is it profitable anymore to mine? And you have to continually look at your cost of power, the cost of hardware versus your return. And the site that I followed on and off for the last couple of months is bitcoinminer.com. And they just recently posted a blog post, a really helpful blog post. And you can read through their backlog if you're getting into Bitcoin mining, because it's all very good stuff. Anyways, they've done a breakdown of your profitability for every 100 megahashes. 100 megahashes a second. So this is really an interesting thing. They're saying, like, if you look at, say, your average price right now, and what you can produce, which is if we're producing 1.4 gigahashes on average, which is actually exactly what I'm producing these days,
1.25 for me.
They have you'll get roughly with the current prices $8 a day of revenue, if you factor in probably power and costs and things like that. So, not very high, but as the Bitcoin value goes up, that number goes from $8 today to sometimes as high as like $15 a day.
Yes.
So it's an interesting blog post to read through and kind of help you get an idea.
If only they were back to being worth $25 again.
Oh boy, right? Yeah, then it's a no-brainer when it's and the overall trend is dramatically up over the last year of Bitcoin.
Yeah.
It's
and
still
there's just that crazy bump for a little bit.
Well, a lot of people just call this the correction to the more proper price range. I mean, $30 doesn't seem reasonable at this stage,
No.
at this infancy of Bitcoin, right? That just doesn't seem appropriate to be 30. But $10,
Mm-hmm.
that seems a little more reasonable for some reason.
Yep.
And as people start using them as an actual, okay, see, the reason I say that is at $10, I think it's more likely that people will use Bitcoin as a way to actually exchange goods. At $30, people are going to hoard them forever. They won't want to get rid of them. They're too valuable. So if they stay lower, they'll actually establish themselves as a possible form of currency, which will then
really,
give it value.
No, that's just an entirely mental thing for people.
Yes.
Because like who says that maybe we should, if they're worth $30 and that's too much, then we should just deal with tenths of a Bitcoin and they're worth $3.
I agree. I think that's what will happen.
Cheap and easy, right?
I think that's what will happen eventually. But
yeah, eventually the price will be so high that we'll only deal in fractions. It's like ounces of gold. 1 ounce of gold is like $1,800 now.
So
Nobody deals in single ounces of gold anymore.
The long-term bet with mining is that you might be spending stuff on, you might be, only making $8 a day now. But if you mine a certain amount of coins, and then if Bitcoin remains successful, that 10 years down the road, who knows how much a Bitcoin could be worth, or even 5 years down the road. So the fact that you've mined yourself, 20 coins over the last few months or whatever it is, those could be extremely valuable 5 years from now.
And more than that is that as it becomes more popular, the trading fee, the fees collected by Bitcoin go into each block, right? So how there's that transaction fee to cause your transaction to get confirmed faster?
And so, I see what you're saying.
When you mine the block, you get 50 plus all the fees for that block. So as eventually when, I forget what number of Bitcoins it happens at, but the number you get for mining a block goes down to 25 and later down to 10.
Yeah.
But at those times, the number of transactions hopefully will be high enough that maybe a block will be worth an average of 30 or something instead of just 25.
True. Because as the volume increases, the transaction level will be so much higher.
The transaction fees will be higher. And eventually, when all the Bitcoins are mined, we'll still need people to mine, and they'll still do it because they'll be making just the transaction fee.
And you still need, and people will, that is actually critical to the way Bitcoin works because you're still going to need the miners to validate the blocks.
You're going to need miners forever.
Yeah.
It might become just a bunch of certain miners and not people doing it on their PCs.
I can see that.
The difficulty rate would be so high. But maybe as we get to the point where the Bitcoin reward is gone and it's only mining, the difficulty will drop. If not enough people are doing it. Yeah. Because specifically, the difficulty rate looks like it might actually go down a little bit on the next block because so many people are starting to drop out of Bitcoin mining.
I totally predicted that, by the way, for this difficulty. Yep. I totally called that. Because it just makes sense that people are becoming a little disenfranchised, and the people that are pushing, a couple hundred mega hashes at most just are not seeing any logic in this anymore.
Well, yeah. Well, if I was doing it just from my home PC here, I'd be getting 60 mega hashes maybe. And so it wouldn't be worth it for me.
Word. What do you think, Alan? I think that's just about all we have in this episode, right?
It is.
Man, TechSNAP 18 in the can right there. Now, remember what I said at the top of this episode. Next episode, it's going to be a feedback Q&A question, and like we always like to say, this is our new saying. I love it now, Alan. You came up with it when you co-hosted Linux Action Show. The advice we give out during the Q&A segment, Al and I charge a lot of money for. That's how we make our livings, actually.
Yep.
And so we're giving it out to you for free. So send in something good. See if you can get that IT question that you've been hanging on to for a long time finally answered. Or maybe it's just a general computer question. Those work too. Yeah. Security, software, whatever it is, you let us know. TechSNAP@jupiterbroadcasting.com or leave a comment wherever you watch this or head over to links.techsnap.tv and submit it right there to our subreddit page. And I should mention, you can always join us live. We have a live IRC chat room, which is rocking, and we do that at jblive.tv at 1 p.m. Pacific time.
Yep.
There you have it. All right, everyone. Well, thanks so much for tuning in to this week's episode of TechSNAP, and we'll see you right back here next Friday.